Ever wondered how the world chess champion Magnus Carlsen faced some of his quickest defeat on the chessboard? In the realm of strategic brilliance, even the best can stumble. Join us as we unravel the surprising moments when Magnus Carlsen, known for his tactical prowess, encountered the swiftness of defeat. From unexpected blunders to cunning adversaries, let's delve into the fastest losses of Magnus Carlsen's career. Starting with this game against Alexander Morozevich, he ranked world number 2 at his peak. As the clock started ticking, Magnus, ever the strategic mind, initiated the game with a daring move, pawn to c4. A ripple of anticipation filled the room as Morozevich responded with a counter-move, shifting his pawn to e6. The battlefield transformed into an English opening spectacle, with white's pawns strategically positioned on c4 and g3, and black's pawns standing firm on d5 and e6. Morozevich seized an opportunity, capturing Magnus's pawn on c4. The champion responded with lightning speed, repositioning his bishop to g2. Before securing the safety of his king with a decisive castling move, Magnus Carlsen had already executed this strategic play, positioning his pieces with precision. In contrast, Morozevich's forces lagged behind, with none of his pieces fully developed. However, Morozevich held an extra pawn. He wisely fortified his position by advancing his pawn to b5, shielding the vulnerable pawn on c4. In a calculated move, Magnus, contemplating his next steps, opted to advance his pawn to a4, launching an offensive against black's central pawns. Having the white pieces, Magnus really needs to win this. Morozevich initiated a pawn exchange after he maneuvered his bishop to a diagonal position. The intricate dance continued as Magnus mirrored the move, placing his bishop on a similar diagonal trajectory. Yet, despite these strategic maneuvers, Morozevich appeared to hold a slight advantage. Magnus expressed dissatisfaction with his current position. However, the tide was about to turn. Over the ensuing moves, Magnus shifted gears, initiating an assault on Morozevich's king. He exchanged a rook for a knight before trading down pawns, exposing a triple threat to Alexander's pawn on f7. Alexander swiftly responded by defending it with his queen. Sensing the urgency, Magnus contemplated his next move before strategically placing his knight on g4, setting the stage for a potentially devastating attack. Morozevich found himself in a precarious position, needing impeccable defense to secure victory. Morozevich countered by repositioning his bishop. Magnus played his knight to f6, compelling a trade of all the pieces on the board. Although Magnus harbored intentions of infiltrating Morozevich's position with his queen, the window of opportunity had closed. With an abundance of extra material at his disposal, Morozevich found himself in commanding position, needing only to trade off pieces to secure victory. Subsequently, he orchestrated another strategic move, forcing a trade by pinning Magnus's bishop to his king with bishop d5. In a prolonged sequence of juggling pieces, Morozevich skillfully concealed his king in a corner, simultaneously threatening checkmate by targeting the pawn on h4. Magnus had no choice but to resign. Keep watching as this next game gets even more interesting. Playing against Boris Savchenko, Magnus makes one of the worst moves in the history of chess. Initiating the game with a pawn to e4, Magnus Carlsen faced Boris Savchenko's response of c5. As the opening moves unfolded, the game transitioned into a Sicilian defense, featuring the white pawns on c4 and e4 and c6 and f6 for black. Magnus strategically placed his bishop on e2, leading to both players castling into a position of perfect equilibrium. In this phase of the match, Magnus seized the opportunity to create an advantage against Boris. After Boris develops his bishop, Magnus responds by initiating a tactical nightmare. Magnus develops his bishop to e3, setting the stage for a potential attack after advancing his pawn to f4. But this doesn't scare Boris. Boris countered swiftly by positioning his queen to a5, establishing a connection between his rooks on the back rank. The tension escalated as Magnus maneuvered his rook to the side, prompting Boris to contemplate his next move. He responds by moving his rook to a more active square. Launching a swift attack, Magnus initiates with his pawn, compelling Boris to tactically retreat his knight to safety. However, the tides turn unfavorably for Magnus as, after contemplation, he makes a consequential blunder, moving his knight to d5, giving away a free pawn on a2. Seizing this opportunity, Boris capitalizes and captures the pawn with his queen. In a bid to recover, Magnus strategically advances his pawn, hinting at a calculated plan. The chessboard drama intensifies as Boris, perhaps underestimating the consequences, plays knight f6, creating an opening for Magnus to execute a decisive move, knight c3. This move positions Magnus to play his pawn to b5, thereby winning a knight. Acknowledging his mistake, Boris sacrifices his knight, allowing Magnus to maintain control of the game. Regrettably, Boris finds himself with no alternative but to capture the pawn while giving away the knight. Magnus is now in control. After a few moves, the bishops are traded off and Magnus offers a queen trade, which Boris should not accept. Boris doesn't match his skills in this arena, as playing an endgame against Magnus is a losing battle. Unfortunately, that leaves Boris no choice but to take the pawn and trade queens with Magnus, allowing Magnus to reposition his bishops to f6. Boris is nowhere near as good at endgames to Magnus. Boris attempts to resist by advancing his pawn to f5. Magnus responds by bringing his king closer, initiating a series of pawn exchanges. Another mistake! Boris's move aids Magnus in inching closer to a win. Magnus advances his pawn to h3, prompting Boris to bring his king nearer, while Magnus maneuvers his rook upward, aiming to stack his rooks for a formidable position. Despite Magnus's seemingly secure position, Boris introduces threats, moving his rook to b3. This may look like a free rook after capturing on b3, but this gives Boris an opportunity to promote his pawn to a queen. Magnus, recognizing the peril of accepting the apparent free pawn, maneuvers his rook to d1, conceding a pawn to Boris. This strategic move levels the playing field, rendering both players in an equal position. Undeterred, Magnus extends an offer for a bishop trade, which Boris declines, opting instead to target Magnus's knight. In response, Magnus tactically retreats his bishop, momentarily avoiding Boris's advances. Boris persistently attacks Magnus's bishop, threatening its capture. Though Magnus is excellent in these positions, his clock is running low and the pressure is starting to build. Boris attacks Magnus's bishop again, threatening to capture it. To counter, Magnus checks Boris's king, instigating a rook trade. The ensuing move unfolds, with both players jockeying for position. In a crucial sequence, Boris advances his pawn to c3, a mere 2 squares away from promotion to a queen. Magnus promptly blocks his advancement, prompting Boris to defend the pawn with his bishop. Now, holding a slightly superior position, Magnus strategically maneuvers his pieces. As moves unfold, Magnus seizes a pawn, leading to a trade-off of the bishop and rook. The board now sees Magnus with a rook and 2 pawns, while Boris holds a bishop and 4 pawns, including a potent pass pawn. Despite the intricacies, the game teeters toward a likely draw unless a blunder occurs from Magnus or Boris. The pieces continue their intricate dance until Magnus, unaware of the impending catastrophe, moves his king to d3 in a bid to defend his pawns. Little does he realize that this move sets the stage for his most significant blunder yet, triggered by Boris's strategic bishop repositioning to e1. In a critical juncture, Magnus makes a fateful move, advancing his king to d4, unwittingly unraveling the game. Boris capitalizes on this blunder, maneuvering his bishop to check the exposed king. This creates a skewer on Magnus's king and rook, which, once Magnus moves his king out of check, Boris will capture his rook. Magnus, realizing his error, hastily relocates his king, but the damage is done. Boris now has the opportunity to capture a free rook. Magnus, after taking his hand off the piece, moves his king again to a better square. Unfortunately, this second move is illegal, prompting Boris to swiftly point out the infraction. Magnus, visibly frustrated, scrunches up his face before stopping the clock, conceding the game. While this loss stemmed from an illegal move, Magnus would soon face an even more devastating challenge. In a casual game against Judith Polgar, Magnus was about to meet his match. Judith initiates the game with e4, met by Magnus's response of c4, entering the Sicilian defense. As the initial pieces come into play, Judith opts an unconventional strategy, castling her king queenside. Amidst traded knights, Magnus positions his bishop on b7, prompting Judith to kick away Magnus's knight. Magnus, undeterred, unveils a clever tactic, seizing Judith's pawn on g4 with his knight. This move is brilliant, as capturing back would expose Judith's rook to a capture. As the game progresses, Judith finds herself at a crossroads, uncertain of her next move. In a decisive maneuver, she kicks out Magnus's knight with her rook. The game unfolds with more moves, and after Judith moves her bishop to e4, Magnus responds with his rook to c8. A massive blunder. Judith realizes this immediately. Seizing the opportunity, Judith capitalizes on this blunder by swiftly placing her bishop on b6. The threat becomes evident. If Magnus takes the bishop, Judith would execute a checkmate on d7. Aware of the impending danger, Magnus thinks for a long time before capturing Judith's bishop on e4. However, the damage is done. Having lost his queen and maneuvered his knight ineffectively, Magnus concedes defeat, resigning after a mere 19 moves. The next game, however, is even more insane. Magnus faces an unusual challenge from an amateur chess player in a Norwegian bar in Oslo, setting the stage for one of the most surprising games in chess history. With the white pieces, Magnus opens with an instant e4, prompting his opponent to respond with e5. The game swiftly transitions into the standard Roy Lopez opening, characterized by connected knights and the move c3. Magnus's opponent follows suit by advancing his pawn to e6, strategically chasing Magnus's bishop away. As the game unfolds, the initial moves are played well. However, the first critical mistake emerges with the move knight g6, providing Magnus the opportunity to seize full control of the center. A quick observation of the body language paints a revealing picture. Magnus exudes confidence, evident in his assured moves, while his opponent, referred to as Ray, appears more contemplative, taking time to weigh and consider each move. At this stage of the match, Magnus Carlsen holds a slight advantage, courtesy of his well-positioned pawns at the center of the board. He's already laying the groundwork for an impending attack, notably with a move bishop c2, strategically targeting A's knight. In this position, Magnus's pieces exhibit heightened activity, creating an ominous outlook for Ray. You can hear the tension in the room as conversations are muttered as the players choose their next moves carefully. Magnus's strategic build-up is particularly evident on the king's side, where he has initiated a formidable attack. The impending threat becomes more pronounced as Magnus positions himself to potentially trap Ray's bishop. The momentum in the match is decidedly shifted, and Ray is facing mounting challenges on the board. If Magnus maintains this strategic approach, victory seems imminent. At this crucial stage, Ray realizes his misstep. Magnus initiates an attack on Ray's knight, compelling him to move. However, after moving the knight, Magnus capitalizes on the opportunity to trap Ray's bishop with a pawn attack, putting Ray at risk of losing a valuable piece. Ray deliberates for some time, realizing the dire situation, ultimately surrendering his bishop by capturing the pawn. Despite the unfavorable position for Ray, Magnus's subsequent move, while playable, could have been better. For instance, a move like Queen g3 would have been more favorable. Ray plays Queen e5, posing a menacing checkmate on the h2 square. Ray's move with Queen h2, intended to create another attack, turns out to be another mistake, lacking the potential to deliver checkmate. Seizing on this error, Magnus responds with Pawn g7, once again putting him in a precarious position. Despite mounting pressure, Ray persists, attempting to navigate his rook away from imminent danger. Under intense pressure, Ray is determined to hold on, and at this critical moment, an unexpected turn of events happens. At this moment, a miracle happens. In a critical moment, Magnus Carlsen makes a costly move, knight f5, allowing Ray to seize a free pawn while exerting high pressure on the queen. In response, Magnus, influenced by the pressure at the moment, attempts to capture the knight. However, this seemingly tactical move turns into a grave error. Attempting a fancy queen fork, Magnus had accidentally blundered his queen, in a twist reminiscent of a previous game where Max made a similar blunder against Magnus. Magnus Carlsen recognizes his error and the unfavorable turn of events. Visibly unhappy, he resigns, acknowledging that his swift moves and overconfidence throughout the match led to a crucial misstep. Despite the loss, the acknowledgement is made that it's acceptable for Magnus to face defeat, as he remains our world chess champion.